Hey guys, welcome to the third episode of Haul Across the Country, the podcast. I am your host, obviously, and uh, face, I guess you could say, of Haul Across the Country, Joe Hall, checking in Sunday morning, June 2nd in Madison, Indiana, getting ready to head to Kentucky. And figure we do a little recap episode of, kind of what happened as we journeyed through Indiana and what we're looking forward to in the next few weeks heading through Kentucky. Um, Indiana on the whole was it was up and down. I mean, it was uh, an introduction to a lot of adversity and also a lot of extreme acts of kindness at the same time. Um, First coming into Indiana, I think it was the fourth day of the walk. I covered 21.7 miles. So at that time, it was my longest mileage day, and got into Richmond, Indiana, just as the sun was setting. And the crew at the Motel 6 there in Richmond, the woman working the front desk was amazing. She saw my cart packed full of gear, and asked, or she said, that's a lot of stuff you got there. And I explained to her, who I am and what we're doing. And she told me about her children who had been bullied through school and have been battling mental health issues since then. And we talked about how they have made some questionable decisions, which we all do, and but they're still here. And I told her, I was like, well, as long as they're still here, there's still time and there's still hope that they can correct their course and get everything going. And she said, no, they are both they're both working back to where they should be, and that's all we can ever do. But yeah, I left there and headed to Centerville, Indiana, which was only about a 10-mile walk. That day was fairly easy. The Centerville Volunteer Fire Department was very cool in giving me a place to camp. They also gave me a little tour of their fire station and a little bit of history of their fire department, which was kind of cool to hear about, and hear about like the different ways that these different size fire departments operate has been really cool too. Uh, Had a nice little dinner at a restaurant there in restaurant slash brewery there in Centerville, a little microbrewery that they have. And uh, I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but at the end of the meal, they had, for every drink you order, they give you a little wooden nickel. And when you're done, on your way out, they've got a little case that's got 4 or 5 different nonprofits that service their community. And you take that nickel and deposit 5 cents to whichever nonprofit you want to, which I thought was really cool. And I know a lot of people think like, oh, well, what's 5 cents going to do? But you take 5 cents from everybody that comes in there, especially the people that order multiple drinks. You multiply that over the course of a day, week, month, year. It's probably some pretty decent money that gets raised for those nonprofits. So props to Five Arch Brewing in Centerville, because that's a really cool thing you guys are doing. The next day, leaving Centerville, I stopped at Annie M's Fresh Pies, which is also right there in downtown Centerville. Um, had a little bit of Oreo pie, which was delicious. I really wanted to have apple pie because I am a 100% apple pie uh, guy. They didn't have any apple pie ready, but they did have some Oreo pie, so it was fantastic. You ever find yourself on 40 driving through Indiana, Annie M's and Five Arch Brewing in Centerville are excellent places to stop. Whether depending on the time of day, breakfast for Annie M's and lunch or dinner at Five Arch. Uh, then after Centerville, we started making our way towards the center of the state, towards Greenfield. And man, Greenfield, it was a great day getting into Greenfield, but it was the hottest day so far. We were only 5 or 6 days into the walk, and I remember passing a sign for a business, and I looked over, and it was 6:30 in the evening, so it was getting later, and it was still 91 degrees out, and I was just like, this is absurd. It should not be this hot out at 6:30 at night in May. But I finished getting into uh, Greenfield. I had a few people that had stopped me along the way. Um, and I had mentioned them in the previous show. The people that stop and donate, drinks or whatnot, or ask what we're doing, they help make the day a little bit better when things are going a little bit rough. Um, but yeah, we got into Greenfield, and as I mentioned before on the last podcast, we sat down and met with Senator Michael Crider, who authored a very large mental health bill in 2023 for the state, and is hoping to infuse more money into the mental health field, into encouraging more people to go into the field and enter the field once they get their degrees, which ultimately, regardless of where you go in the country, tends to be the issue. Is there are too few people out there doing the job, so you have these long periods before you can even get in to see someone, whether it be a therapist or a counselor or anything. You're usually having to wait weeks or months to get in to sit down and talk to somebody. And in some cases, that can mean the difference between life and death for people. So, he's making strides in Indiana to do better, and I got to applaud him for that. And then on the way out of Greenfield, as I touched on in last podcast episode we did, I sat down with Sam Teisch, the father of Sammy Teisch, a 10-year-old boy who on May 5th committed suicide due to relentless bullying at school. I shared the change.org petition on the last podcast. Feel free to go to change.org and just look up Sammy Teisch. It's a Teusch. They've got the Sammy Teisch Anti-Bullying Act. Last time I looked, it was over 15,000 signatures. So we need to continue to keep pouring signatures on that thing so we can get that act put into place. Bullying right now, it's a lot worse than it was when we were kids. I know a lot of the older generation likes to think of these kids as soft, but we never had to deal with bullying 24/7 like kids today do. And that makes it much more difficult to get through a day, a week, a month, whatever, when you can't even escape the bullying when you get home. So, go to change.org, look that up, and let's get as many signatures as we possibly can. Let's overload that thing with signatures. Leaving Greenfield, we headed for Indianapolis in the Capitol because got to visit all the Capitol buildings. We got to the east end of Indianapolis. We reached out to Indy Fire. We called and called and called. We never heard anything back. So I had to get a hotel that night. And the only reason I like hotels is for the ability to do the podcast and utilize the Wi-Fi. Is it nice to sleep in a bed sometimes? Yeah. I actually prefer sleeping in tents. But as I am the literal face and the president of a nonprofit, I really don't want to trespass to camp. Even if it was at a church or something, it's still a bad look if I were to get in trouble for trespassing to camp somewhere overnight. So it's usually like if we can't reach a fire station and if there's a hotel there, then we reach out and book it. You know, the stretch coming up in Kentucky is going to be tough to do that just because it's significantly more rural and there are way fewer hotels. But you know what? That's part of this adventure. It was one thing that I learned on the first walk across the country is every different one is an adventure. It's a different experience every time. So we'll figure it out. But I woke up that morning, headed into Indianapolis. I checked with another fire station in Indianapolis and said, "Hey, could you get a hold of or give me a way to get a hold of a couple of stations on the south end of town as I'm leaving to see if I could throw my tent up and camp out there?" And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Those two stations are in pretty good parts of town." He's like, "They shouldn't have an issue." Gave me the number. I forwarded it to Adam, my firefighter friend, who typically reaches out to all the fire departments to try to grease the wheels for me to get a place to camp. And as I had left the Capitol building, also stopped at a really great like pizza place there, and it's nestled in downtown Indianapolis, and you could walk right by it and miss it. But if you're in downtown Indy and you want like a really cool vibe with really good people and some delicious food, Pearl Street Pizza and Pub. Or Pearl Street Pizza and Brewery. I just know it's on Pearl Street. It looks like it's right down an alley. I looked it up and I almost walked right by it. but the people there were amazing and the food was delicious. Um, but I had lunch there and I started heading south out of town. And it wasn't long heading out of Indianapolis that Adam got back in touch with me and said that the public informations officer for Indy Fire said they don't own the land around the fire stations and they couldn't allow me to camp, which was it was a shot in the gut for me. Uh, because at that time we hadn't raised a lot of money with donations, and hotel rooms are not cheap, so we were kind of burning through things not as fast as they were coming in, but a lot quicker than I want to. uh, I started walking, and I messaged a friend of mine, and I was kind of having a breakdown. I was like on the verge of just bawling as I'm walking down the road, walking down 31 South, um, or Meridian Street, excuse me, heading out of Indianapolis. And it lasted for about 5 or 10 minutes where I was just like, what am I doing? Like we're blowing through all this money, like, and I still have been spending my own money on food. I haven't even used any of the haul across the country money that's been raised for food at this point. Still to this day, I haven't. I have been using my own money, or when people will drop like $20 or $30 cash and give it to me, I'll use that for food. Um, but the goal was always that the haul across the country funds are for gear, um, lodging if we need it, and food. But for whatever reason, I still have, like, I felt, I don't know, guilty about using the haul across the country funds for food. So I've still been paying for my food out of my own pocket. Literally, the money we've been raising has strictly been going to putting me up in a room for a night when we can't find anywhere to camp. Tonight, the room I'm in currently was donated by the citizens of Jefferson County for suicide prevention. I met with them yesterday, and I had stayed at the northernmost Madison Township Volunteer Fire Station 2 nights ago. They had offered me, the ability to come in. They're like, "Hey, we don't have any beds. We got some recliners. You can grab a shower." Which, when you're doing something like this, getting a shower as often as possible is like a godsend. Uh, and then they were having a bingo night, so they had burgers and hot dogs and stuff. So, you know, free food and a place to lay my head is always welcome. But I woke up from that night and just wasn't really. I started coming to a pizza place yesterday that I was set to meet with the citizens of Jefferson County for suicide prevention, and also Kindness in Jefferson County, another nonprofit down here. But I'll get to more of them later. I was walking to both of those places, and when I first woke up, I knew something was off, because you know your own body, and when you wake up and your body is, how do I put this without being disgusting? When your body is off schedule, uh, I knew something was off for the day. And as soon as I started walking the 3 miles to get to the pizza place to meet up with them, even small hills, like, my legs were screaming. Every step I took was painful to my labrum, my hip groin area. For those of you that don't know, when I had my motorcycle accident in 2020, one of the few things one of the many things they found, but they didn't operate on this, was a torn labrum in my right hip. So there are times where every step I take is it not excruciatingly painful, but as a guy with a high pain tolerance, it hurts. And combining that with trying to push up the hills, and my legs were just tight, my calves were still tight. I was dehydrated. The citizens of Jefferson County for suicide prevention got together, and they donated this room for me last night so I could get some rest, which was, I hate spending, more than one day in a town if it's not for a reason of sitting down with people and having discussions. But this is also a marathon, not a sprint. So I've got to be smart about completely destroying my body. But anyway, I was leaving Indiana, heading south, and I got over this, 5-10 minute pity party I had for myself, and, like, I don't know what it was. It just kind of clicked. But I started thinking about Sammy Teish. I started thinking about Jackson Zinda, my friend Sarah's son, who committed suicide 4 years ago. Thought about my uncle, who committed suicide 20 years ago this year. I thought about my coworker James Hasty, who committed suicide 5 weeks before I left on this trip. And I said, you know what, even if we blow through the money, let's just say, I get the hotels when I have to, and food and whatnot, and the money goes kaput. I don't care. I'm going to continue to walk. Like I went to like this PG David Goggins mode where I said, I was like, I don't care what it's going to take. Like, if you've ever looked at a full body picture of me, I've got plenty of fat stores to live on. We'll just leave it at that. I said, I will push this cart until they have to call an ambulance and pick me up off the side of the road. I was like, I will push this thing until I can physically no longer push it. Should we run out of money? I was like, I just started saying that to myself, like, picking myself up and kind of, smacking myself in the face a little bit. So let's get this thing done. So I pushed forward. We ended up getting a hotel on the south end of Indianapolis that night, a little Comfort Inn, and then I began to head south, and got into Columbus, Indiana, about a week ago. Contacted their fire station, and asked, hey, would you guys mind if we threw up a tent for the night? So I get to Station 4. And the guys there were super cool. They were like, "Hey, man," they're like, we had a really bad set of storms coming in, and I was gonna try to go further, but because of the storms, I wanted to be careful. I didn't want to go too far and get stuck in the middle of a thunderstorm because the two bands of storms that were coming through were looking like they were gonna be pretty violent. But I got into Columbus before I went to the fire station. I got into Columbus and I stopped at the emergency room. For those of you that haven't been following along on Facebook or Instagram or any of the socials, my pinky toes had been severely blistered, and my left one had gotten to the point where it was infected. And so I went in there, and this was the crazy thing. Like, due to my pain tolerance, when we got my socks off so that the nurse could look at everything, they found it's like 3 other blisters, large blisters on my feet that I never saw because I didn't really pay attention. Like, I don't look at the bottom or the heels of my feet. And when I get walking, usually after like 5 or 10 steps, whatever blister pain I have tends to just mask itself, and I just walk. But I had like 2 identical blisters on the outside of my heels that were about like probably like a third the size of a golf ball on each one. Underneath my left foot, and my left foot takes more impact than my right because your roads typically slant to the outside. And as I walk facing traffic, my left foot is always like on a decline. It's always doing more pushing. It's doing a little bit more, and it's getting a little bit more friction than my right foot. But there was a probably like half the size of an egg, a third the size of an egg blister on the bottom of my foot, like right on the ball of my foot. Couldn't tell. Like, I never really paid attention to it. And then that was also when I took that sock off and I looked at my right pinky toe, and it had a blister on it that had doubled the toe in size. Um, After they had looked at everything, I got to the fire station that night. I got some alcohol pads and a safety pin, and just busted all of them open to drain them. Most people say you're not supposed to. A lot of the ultra runners I've talked to over the years have said it's kind of your preference. I didn't rip all the skin off. I just put a small hole in to drain them, so it'd be a little bit less. It would take up less room in a sock and a shoe. And I was like, cool. So we're getting ready. The fire department that night at Station 4 got me pizza, and I was in the shower because they're like, yeah, go ahead and grab a shower. They went out on a call, and they came in, and I'm getting cleaned up, and I hear the lieutenant for the night. He kind of yells through the door. He's like, Joe. And I was like, yeah, what's up? I'm just finishing up the shower. And he's like, hey, me and the guys are going to set up your tent out, help you set up your tent outside because chief doesn't, you're not allowed to camp inside, which I was like, fine. All I really ever asked for is a place to put the tent down. It worried me with the second band of storms coming through. The first band came through right as I got into the hospital, and it all moved through while I was in there, which was perfect timing. But I get in there, and so I get done cleaning up and everything. We've already eaten our pizza, and which Zwanzig's in Columbus, Indiana, has some phenomenal pizza, by the way. I do eat a lot of pizza. I feel like a Ninja Turtle. But I get my tent set up outside. It was it was dark already, so I wasn't super perceptive to the land. Ended up sitting the tent in a little bit of a low spot. Um, got in the tent right as the storms were coming in, because I typically don't stake my tent down because it's not a situation where I get to a spot and like put the tent up and then go for a hike for the day. It is get where I'm going, set the tent up, jump inside, get some sleep. So I got into the tent. Uh, the storm started moving through, and I'm telling you, man, as soon as the rain started hitting the rain fly, I was out. Yeah, it was thunder and lightning, but the rain just put me right. The rain and just being tired in general put me right to sleep. I got up the next day. The bottom of my sleeping pad and the bottom of the tent were soaked. I was dry, which was fine. You know, everything else in the tent was good. It's just it sat in a low spot where water drained, and essentially the bottom part of the tent just sat in water. So I flipped, got everything picked up, brought it over to the concrete, tried to dry everything out, and I was going to head for North Vernon, Indiana that day. Well, I started walking. I got about a mile and a half into the day, and at the hospital they were like, "You really should take a few days off. One, so you can let the antibiotics kind of get to work, but also just because you want the blisters to kind of drain out and dry up and heal." And I was like, I don't want to take 3 days off. Uh, so I started walking. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take 1 day off. I'm going to let these things dry up, uh, and then we'll get back at it. So I grabbed a room at the Super 8 in town, and I had made a connection in town with Dan Marsh. Dan and his family, his parents, everybody, some of the greatest people I've met on any of the walks. Dan was a junior high friend of a fellow wrestling coach of mine back home in Ohio, and it just so happened, I was waiting to get my antibiotics, and I was like trying to find an Uber in Columbus, which are very very sparse. And my friend Jeff just out of nowhere messaged me. He's like, "Hey, my friend Dan lives in Columbus. If you need anything, he's gonna message you." And Dan was a lifesaver. He grabbed me from CVS after I picked up my prescription. One of the nurses at the Columbus Regional Hospital was amazing. She took time off work to take me to CVS to pick up the prescription because it was still storming. I told her not to wait because when we got there, the pharmacy was about to go on lunch break. So I was like, don't waste any more of your hours at work. I was like, I'll find a way back. If I have to limp it back, I'll limp it back. But Dan picks me up, gets my prescription. That next morning, I go to Walmart to pick up an order for some stuff I picked up, some moleskin, some athletic tape, just to kind of cover any future blister endeavors my feet decide to go on. And I'm sitting there and I send Dan a message. I'm like, hey, do you have your truck? Can you run me over to this hotel that was on the far end of town, away from where I was walking? He's like, yeah, I got you. So he gets me over there, get in a hotel for the day. I put my feet up, like I literally just dry them out. Like my feet are on the bed. Like I don't even get in the shower until late at night. Like I wanted maximum, drying out of these blistered toes and blistered feet. Um, a lot of the ones on the heels and the one on the ball of my foot had already healed pretty much underneath, so they had been there a while, and I just ignored the pain. But we get up the next day and I'm like, let's go. It's like 23 miles to North Vernon. I actually added about 3 miles to my day walking distance wise because I was on that end of town. But I start pushing and I'm going into Columbus and I can feel my cart wobbling out of nowhere. This is like weird. And I keep going, keep going, keep going. And it is just wobble like, uh, uh, I couldn't explain it. And then all of a sudden I start hearing like ting, 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 and my spokes started popping out. Somewhere along the way, I don't know if somebody had bumped into the cart while I was in a grocery store or something and bent spokes, but like spokes just started popping out of the wheel, and eventually the wheel just snapped off. So I'm sitting there on the side of the road, frustrated again, and I sent Dan a text. I'm like, because he's a teacher. So I was like, hey, Dan, can you do me a favor? I tell him what's going on. Uh, we picked the cart up. There are two bike shops in town, so we run to the one that was open, Columbus Cycling and Fitness. Uh, I pull the wheels off. I show them, explain to them what's going on, and they were super helpful. They did everything they could. They found a trike bicycle that had the exact same wheels, and the wheels that came on the cart are 20 spoke. The ones that they ended up buying for me, well, not for me, but I paid for them. The ones they ended up buying and shipping were like 36 spoke, so they're almost two times the strength of the original wheels. But they say, hey, we're going to get these overnighted from Fort Wayne, so we should have them tomorrow between 12 and 3. You can grab we can bring the cart over, we'll get them put on. They had to have someone custom make axles for it, because the wheels that they got weren't built the same as the original wheels because it's different manufacturers. So Dan's dad, who has worked for Cummins for a long time, he's got a lathe down in his basement. He grabbed one of the axles from the original wheel, got the measurements from the gentleman at the bike shop, and went down and built me two custom axles so those new wheels would fit. But while we're trying to figure everything out, Dan reaches out to one of his former wrestlers, because Dan is a wrestling coach, and he's a firefighter. So they say, hey, you could stay at Station 5. And I'm like, excellent. They let me throw my tent up. Again, we had pizza that night for dinner. Great conversation with a couple of the firefighters. Monty sat out there, and we talked mental health for, oh God, probably an hour or two. And, he talked about some of the things that firefighters see. It's kind of like the side of firefighting that the public doesn't necessarily, I won't say we don't acknowledge it, but they don't realize it, or we kind of ignore it, is like some of the things that these guys see and have to deal with, and have to be able to put in the back of their minds while they do their job, while they save lives, or anything like that. While they put out a fire, they have to put all of these awful things that they have seen, are seeing, away, so that they can do their job. And without going too much into his story, you got to really understand that those guys go through a lot. Really, I mean, it doesn't matter what size department, whether it's a big city, small city, rural, volunteer department. Those people see a lot of stuff that we will never see. We might only see like the grotesque stuff in movies. These people are seeing some of this stuff in real life, and not everybody can compartmentalize that stuff, and it's a struggle. But while he and I were talking, um, it was him and a couple other firefighters had mentioned the Stride Center in Columbus, which is a mental health and substance abuse service provider. And when I ended up leaving Columbus a couple of days later, I stopped by the Stride Center, and man, they were amazing. I rang their doorbell, and I just happened to be walking by it as I was leaving Columbus, because I took an extra turn from the road I was already on leaving Columbus, because I wanted to see their war memorial, which was a really somber but cool memorial for the soldiers that Columbus and that kind of surrounding area have lost in war. They have these tall stone like obelisks, like monuments, and on them are etched in the final letters that were sent or received by the families of these people that were lost during service. And man, it's crazy that you see these notes where people are like, man, I can't wait to get home. I can't wait to get home. And then you see, hey, they passed away like a month after writing this letter, or a couple of it, it definitely makes you uh, thankful for, you know, the freedoms that we do have here. Whether you, regardless of your political leanings, we've got a lot of freedoms in this country that a lot of people don't, and it's thanks to them. But I was leaving town after seeing that, and I happened to look up to my right and saw Stride Center, and I was like, hey, that's the mental health service that a couple of the firefighters had talked about. So I jumped across the street and I rang the doorbell. People at the Stride Center were phenomenal. They took me on a tour. We talked about the services they provide. They have like de-escalation for people that are in crisis. They've got a mobile response team that will meet people out in the field who are in a crisis. Uh, they will even transport. They have treatment options where they will take somebody to a treatment facility, and if that person completes their treatment without signing themselves out against medical authority, they will take that person wherever they need to go after they're done. And they help service 5 different counties, not just Columbus, which is amazing. They've got a shower in there for people who may need to come in and get a shower. Because again, having been on the road um, for a significant bit of time, and not always having access to a shower, it makes you feel like a new person. It makes you feel um, sort of whole again to get a real shower when you've gone an extended period of time without one. But finished the tour, had a great time with the people, and then I headed out of town. But heading back to where I was at the fire station, I camped out that night. The wheel never came in from UPS, so the bike shop never called me back. Um, so like the next day, I told one of the firefighters that was there, because they shift change at 7 in the morning. I said, "Hey, my wheel didn't come. I'm gonna have to stay another night." And then tomorrow, I've already talked to uh, my friend Dan, and I'm just going to start backpacking. I'm going to pack my day pack, and I'll just start walking. He's going to pick the cart up, and whenever the wheel's ready, he'll just get the wheel and bring it to me en route. And he's like, "That's fine with me." He's like, "I'll be gone when you gotta, in the morning anyway." But apparently, he ran it by their chief, and they were kind of like, "Not really supposed to be camping here, period. We've kind of accommodated you a couple of days to help out." And I was like, "No harm, no foul." I'm not gonna be mad about it. They helped out how they could. So get on the phone with Dan. I'm like, "Hey Dan, here's where we're at." So Dan picks me up. We go back to that Super 8 that I was at a couple of nights earlier. I said, "Hey, just keep the cart." I had the day pack packed for the next day. I said, "I'm just gonna start hoofing it to North Vernon. When the wheel gets ready, just have them put it on, and you bring the cart out to me if that's cool." And he said, "Absolutely." Um, so I, wake up the next day, boom, throw the backpack on, and start hoofing it. And uh, I think we were right at Scipio Fire Department, volunteer fire department, or it was a little bit before that, when the bike shop calls me and tells me, "Hey, so we can't get your tires off the old wheels. How did you put them on?" And I said, "I put them on with like 2 or 3 tire levers, like the instructions said, because I had put run flat airless tubes on my big tires, because if they don't go flat, that's one less thing I've got to worry about." And he was like, "Yeah, none of us can pull these off. Like we can't, like physically, we just can't pull these things off." And so I ended up having to buy 2 new wheels, or 2 new tires, and new tubes, heavy duty tubes, um, which led to a substantial amount paid out for wheels that I was not expecting to have to pay for at 2 weeks into my adventure. But anyway, they got that on. They had to make a small adjustment to the axles that Dan's dad fixed, and they got the wheels on. He brought it out to me. Finished getting into North Vernon a few nights ago. Uh, Never heard back from their fire department. My friend Adam was waiting to hear back from their chief. He never did about camping, so hotel night again. Um, got up the next morning, started heading towards Madison, the city I'm currently at. That's right on the border. And man, the first half of the day was brutal. Weather was beautiful, but there were just like a lot of hills that it was like a rolling country, but it seemed like they just kind of kicked my butt. I'm not gonna lie. It took me 6 hours to go like 10 and a half miles, which is slow for me. Usually I'm like 2 to 2.5 miles an hour. So it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I find a parking lot that was empty, and I sit down. I'm chugging some water, have a couple Pop Tarts. My peanut butter sandwiches that I had made a couple of days ago had gone bad, so I did not get to eat any peanut butter sandwiches. Um, but I also slammed about 1,500 milligrams of ibuprofen and changed my socks. And because I looked at the time and I saw that it was 2, but I kept thinking it was noon, like 12, not 2. And I got done with my break at 2:30, and I was thinking 12:30. And the fire department here in Madison was expecting me at like 6:30. And I'm like, dang, I got to hoof it. I would have had to make it like, I think I had like 12 and a half miles left for the day to do in 4 hours. Um, I ended up getting the last 12 and a half or so done in a little less than 5 hours. I got there a little bit before 7:30. But I was just going. I mean, I pushed as hard as I could for the end of the day, um, but was super dehydrated. And that's the thing for me is like, I, even on the first walk, I try to drink, and I always end up getting behind the 8 ball. It's the same thing with food. If I don't eat enough, usually there are days, the next day is almost impossible for me to go because I'm just exhausted. Um, so I got into Madison Fire Department. The people were great. Like I said, they had a shower for me with like towel and everything. Had a towel and a washcloth set up. It was awesome. They were like, the recliners were super comfortable. Once I kicked that thing back, it wasn't. I was falling asleep while they were still having bingo in the next room. I was like sitting there on my phone and was like, uh. But woke up the next day. Like I said, got ready to go meet with the citizens of Jefferson County for suicide prevention, and I could just tell my body was off. There was something wrong, and we started walking, and every step hurt. Uh, and then, like I said, pushing up the hills, my legs were just exhausted. Like I felt like I had no juice in them. So I get to the pizza place. I hang out with Dina, and then I met Mike Sims, who runs Kindness in Jefferson County, which is like a group here. And they had 2 pair of shoes that were donated when he put a post out about me and the walk. Um, but we sat there and we talked mental health. We talked about Mike's time as a crisis intervention uh, police officer, and he said a lot of Kentucky officers are certified in crisis intervention. Rather than taking people to jail in mental health crises, they'll take it crises. They'll take them to uh, hospitals and whatnot and get them help, which is great. Um, but we're sitting down and eating at Brittany's Brick Oven Pizza, Bebop's, and again, pizza. Yes, I will never say no to pizza. Um, but Dina surprises me and says, "Hey, our group got together and we all chipped in and we got you a room for tonight because we knew you weren't feeling well." So that's where I'm at now. Um, and then later on that night, somebody else that from that group that started following the page asked, well, do you need anything? And I said, really, no. I was like, I've got a lot of stuff on the cart. I've got a lot of snacks. Um, I was like, I'll probably go grab some dinner later and a couple gallons of water. And she's like, I'll bring it. Me and a friend are going to get some Chinese food. What would you like? I'll bring it by with a couple of gallons of water. And so thank you to Katie for bringing that last night. Um, but yeah, Indiana was very up and down for me as far as like the things I went through. But on the same note, it was a good test for uh, battling through some of the adversity that you're going to see when you do something as crazy as this, as walking across the country or walking to all 48 states and capitals. Uh, but yeah, we're getting ready to head into Kentucky today. Should hit Frankfort by Wednesday, and then it's a long trek from Frankfort to Charleston, West Virginia. So if I can make it to Frankfort by Wednesday, I've got a chance to meet with Ken Fleming, who is one of the legislators out there that is trying to do some work for mental health. So we're going to sit down, hopefully, for about a half hour and talk to him. Like I said, hopefully I can make it there in time to where we can actually set the interview up and we can do some of these interviews in person. And I'm not just, trying to recollect everything and recap it for people, because the goal was ultimately for the walk to do that, was to actually, sit down and interview people and bring them on the show that way. But yeah, Kentucky will probably be a little bit more hilly than Indiana was. And, obviously heading into West Virginia, we're going to start getting into Appalachia a little bit. So at least I've had a few weeks to kind of get my sea legs under me. But I want to say thank you to everybody who's followed along. who's joined the journey, whether it be on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, everybody that listens to the podcasts. I really do appreciate it. We're just trying to put out good knowledge about mental health and give the people that are out there that are struggling some inspiration and some hope. So as we wrap this up, please remember to check out change.org. Look for the Sammy Teisch Anti-Bullying Act. That is TEUSCH. Look that up. Let's get the signatures for them. Also, if you are in Jefferson County, in the Madison area, look up Citizens for Suicide or Citizens of Jefferson County for Suicide Prevention. Dina is doing amazing things at getting this group of people together to help save lives. I believe she said that down here they average one person who says they are having suicidal thoughts per day, which in a city that's not super large is a pretty big number, bigger than it should be. And also check out Kindness in Jefferson County on Facebook. It is a bunch of people banding together to help each other out, which is what we should all be doing. All right. So just remember, guys, if things are getting dark and you're struggling, just get to the end of the day, go to sleep, wake up, and do it again. And you put enough of those nights together and it'll all come out. It'll all get better. If it doesn't, please reach out to someone. 988 if you're feeling like you are in a crisis or you're thinking of hurting yourself, please reach out. They'll get some help to you, or they will try to help you out. And if you think you have nobody else to talk to, we are available. Haulacrossthecountry.com. Those emails will come straight to me. I'm fairly frequent about checking them. Or if you follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/haulacrossthecountry, send a message. I am not licensed to provide any type of service, but I will listen and I will try the best I can to get you help or to guide you where you need to go. I love you guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time on Haul Across the Country, the podcast.